Great, the live stream is now live, so we shall begin the meeting. Good evening everyone and welcome to the Scrutiny Management Panel meeting. I'm Councillor Cal Corkery, Chair of this panel. I'd like to firstly draw your attention to the usual housekeeping information. Firstly, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. There is a public gallery. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building at today's meeting. May I also draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. This is linked to the microphones, therefore may I please remind all attendees to turn on their microphones to speak and then off again once you've finished. That's via the button on the right hand side of the microphone in front of you. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not a view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Please can I ask members and officers to introduce themselves, and we'll start to my left and work our way around. So, firstly, Peter.
Peter Wolf, City Solicitor.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services.
Paddy May, Corporate Strategy Manager.
Eddie Stray, Systems Development Service.
Emily Strodwick for the Hillsey Ward.
Abdul Kadir, Baffin's Ward.
Mary Valley, Cushaman Moormean.
Graham Heaney, St Jude Ward Councillor.
Lewis Gosling, Copner Councillor.
And James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Great, thank you everyone and welcome again. So moving on to the agenda that we've got to get through today. First item is apologies for absence, of which we have received none, but we have been notified by Councillor Kadir that he may have to leave early depending on what time we finish the meeting, so thank you for letting us know that. Moving on, item number 2, declarations of interests. Do members have any interests they wish to declare? No? Okay, moving on again. Number 3 is minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of July. These minutes have obviously been circulated and published. Hopefully members have had a chance to review them, particularly those that were in attendance. Are members happy that the minutes of the meeting that have been circulated are a correct record of the discussion? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, moving on. Item number 4. It's an update on progress against the agreed actions following the Local Government Association Corporate Peer Challenge Team Review. This was something that we discussed at the last meeting and we agreed that it would be a useful thing to put on the agenda for today's meeting in order to get an update on the actions that were previously agreed by Cabinet and how their implementation is progressing. So members, we have Natasha Edmonds, who's Director of Corporate Services, and Paddy May, who's the Corporate Strategy Manager, present. They have obviously written the report and read it, I would have thought. Is there anything else you would like to say or kind of add in summary of the report that's been circulated?
I think just to say that obviously there's clearly good progress on a lot of the actions. They've all been subsumed into business as usual by officers now. So rather than tracking against an action plan, we've subsumed these activities into our normal ways of working.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions that we have or comments based on the report? Councillor Heaney?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, as some people might expect me to, about item 4 on the constitutional review. We've sort of got some way with this, but it does say progress rating is amber, and I'm just wondering where we are and what are the next steps for doing that.
It's very difficult to say where we are with this, really, on the basis that we're in the hands of our independent consultants who seem to have changed direction, changed their staff, changed their lead officers and members and all the rest of it. So whilst they've done the initial reviews, they've not come back to us with anything constructive relevant to what we would like or advise you to do in terms of structural changes to your constitution, which is disappointing, I have to say, and beyond chasing them, I'm I'm 15 seconds away from being slightly less pleasant in a different type of guise, because they're not necessarily doing what they should do. They've done a third of it rather than 2/3 of it by now. So, I'm sorry to report that, Councillor Heaney, but it's probably going to be ending up back with us as an internal piece of work. But there you go.
I mean, we've effectively had a sort of small working group where groups have nominated individuals, so I'm doing it from the Labour group, and then we've had an open invitation to other members to get involved in discussion. So we've certainly gathered a lot of evidence and information, so we probably have a reasonable amount to go on in respect to what we can do. I suppose it's a question of deciding how much and how far we want to go with it, I suppose. Is there any merit in getting the group reps together to maybe have a think about where we go from here, and whether we want to try and do something ourselves while our consultants work out what they're doing? I mean, it's a bit of a difficult one, I know, but
If you remember at the beginning of this process, I gave the group probably 4 or 5 different thematic areas that were always going to be an issue to us. And frankly, if we came back as a cohort, we could probably sort of tick them off as we did them. And my view was always to do less better and take 1 or 2 of them thematically and deal with them. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting there waiting for our consultants to advise us to do A, B and C, when the reality of the fact is we just have to push it through ourselves. You know, if the members have got an issue about how clunky the Constitution is, I'm perfectly happy with that. Albeit, anecdotally, it's worked sort of okay. Albeit, if I ask any of you as members, you would say there are bits you don't like and there's bits you find difficult with, and there's bits you seem to think that would need to be reviewed. And I've got 3 or 4 of them off the top of my head that we could do now. Frankly, I think you're probably right, Graham. Let's get it back and see what we can do. I'm happy with that.
Thank you, Graham. And Peter, any further comments or questions on the report, members? Mary?
Obviously, I'm new to all this, so I'm sort of catching up. Under the equalities, diversity and inclusion bit, which I'm really interested in, we recently had a situation where the young Sudanese boy was killed locally. I went to the vigil and we all stood around like plums, not speaking to each other, not knowing who was going to speak and who was going to say what. And it seemed to me that we all needed to kind of come together at some point and discuss this. And it wasn't just councillors who needed the shove, it was some of the senior officers too. I think I'd like us to get together and do some training together on it so that we know what to do in these situations. It was embarrassing and awkward, and I have not forgotten it. That's how much it affected me, and certainly Shah as well. So yeah, that's just a request. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'm getting it in now anyway.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to respond to, Natasha?
Thank you. Yes, equalities training is available for all members, and it's in the training calendar. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, Mary, and I think one of the things that we are very conscious of is the need to constantly stay on top of that awareness around equality, diversity, inclusion. I think we've come a long way in the last sort of 3 to 4 years. But there's always going to be more that we can do, and I have reached out to Sarah Daly, Director of Children's Social Care, around that particular incident with that young man, on how we work with some of our communities, particularly for children in our care. We are corporate parents, and around how we can support that. But we do, through our equalities work, engage with our communities, and we will continue to do that. We have a draft strategy going to Cabinet. It says September in here, but dates have changed, so it's going to Cabinet in early October, after which we will then consult with our communities on that draft strategy. So we're going to continue that dialogue with our communities and take on board that feedback and your feedback as well, because clearly you're very close to communities, so we're always very grateful for any feedback that you can give us around any particular issues that arise. So thank you.
So again, it wasn't just about our communities needing training.
Absolutely right. And yeah, that part of the equality strategy has an action plan which has an entire section dedicated to workforce. And members, yes.
Great, thank you. Members, any further questions or comments? I've got a few that I'll ask just before we move on. So under 4 that Councillor Heaney has discussed, the kind of review of the constitution, governance, etc. The update says that Centre for Governance and Scrutiny have undertaken a review, but are we to understand that the review is ongoing?
Council, what they promised they would deliver, they haven't delivered in its entirety. They've done a review of our constitution, but they haven't come back, and we expected them to come back with a set of thematic areas for us to discuss, as Councillor Heaney was alluding to, in a forum, and they haven't done that bit. Now, it's not to say they won't, it's just they haven't. And I have chased them, and I will chase them again, and you'll get to a point whether you either think they've delivered what they said they'd do for the fee, or they haven't. So we're in that sort of world, in a sense that, you know, that they could finish this piece of work off quite quickly, but the trouble is, you know, the people I was dealing with day 1, day 2, day 3 have changed. They've left, they've retired, they've done whatever, you know. So there's a lack of continuity there in respect of having reviewed what your findings were and what are your recommendations. So it's those 2 areas that they're adrift on, really. They've done 1/3, they've got 2/3 to go. It's probably the easy way of putting it.
Thanks. That's great, thank you. Secondly, this is more a reflection, I guess, on the discussion at a previous meeting. I know there was a number of comments made with regards to the member officer protocol and issues around it. I think it was Councillor Bosher in particular, but others were also interested. So it's useful to see that kind of commented upon within the report in terms of work that's going to be coming forward in terms of a workshop and further work on that. So that's useful, thank you. Then thirdly, I had a question about number 1. So the recommendation was to create more time and space for collective reflection and long-term planning for the future, which would include members, senior officers, and then jointly. The updates, it seems to me, where it refers to members, largely, if not exclusively, refers to the Cabinet and the administration. Now, clearly, there are lots of us councillors who aren't members of the Cabinet or the administration, and particularly given the political climate of no overall control, I wondered whether we were also looking at how we can kind of factor in non-Cabinet members into that discussion and that strategising around kind of long-term planning.
I think it's probably a reflection of the format of this document, but I think what there is a much greater focus now on cross-party working groups. So I think there's been quite a number of cross-party working groups established around the local plan and regeneration activities. We've got a cross-party working group established around the future of the civic office. So the approach that we're trying to take is to work with members to create some of that cross-party working on some of those big ticket items. So that's probably why it isn't reflected here, but if you look on item 3, you'll see in there where some of the policies have been worked on through all-member cross-party workshops, for example. So they're reflected elsewhere in how we're working.
That's great, thank you.
And I guess the other thing is there is also, you know, for big significant issues, there'll often be all-member briefings set up to try to make sure that there's that sort of wider understanding and also a chance for questions and answers. So I guess it's both bits. I think as Natasha said, I think the issue is that I guess we developed an action plan in response to the recommendations, and this is reporting against the action plan, but there are things going on outside the action plan which also we'll be addressing with those recommendations.
Great, thank you very much. That was all my questions. Last chance, members, before we move on, anything else that anyone wants to say on this? Oh, Mary?
Just to say it looks really good. It's encouraging.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Echo Councillor Valley's comments there. I think it was useful to kind of have this discussion in this forum. I think the reason it was brought up is we were mindful this wasn't one of those things that kind of ticks a box for Cabinet to pass and then gets forgotten. So it's useful, yeah, to have the report come forward and for us to get better understanding of all that work that clearly is going on behind the scenes to ensure that the recommendations are implemented. So thank you very much. Okay, so members, this is a noting report, and members happy that the report and the comments may be noted. Yep, okay, that's agreed. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 5, which is the consideration and agreement for the draft scoping document for the scrutiny item, the use of systems thinking within Portsmouth City Council. So members who were at the last meeting will recall we had a discussion around this, and for those that weren't present, I think generally there were members who were interested in this as a topic. I think it's been a little while since Scrutiny Management Panel itself has undertaken a review into a particular topic. I think in previous years the way in which it's worked is more just focused on kind of overseeing the work of the themed scrutiny panels. However, clearly there will be issues such as systems thinking and others which don't necessarily fit into one of the themed scrutiny panel topics, and are maybe of a kind of corporate or general council interest. So the idea was that maybe systems thinking is such a topic, and it would be useful for Scrutiny Management Panel in some way to undertake some kind of review or report into that topic. So, on that note, a draft scoping document has been circulated and attached. Let's try and find my copy. I'm not sure. Oh, it's at the back of there, isn't it? So, hopefully members have had a chance to look at that. Obviously, we need to have a look at that again today and have a discussion and come to some consensus around what we want to do in terms of next steps. So, we have invited along officers to kind of talk to us about this and answer any of our questions. James Hill, Director of Housing, who kind of oversees a lot of the work within his directorate for systems thinking, even though he works across the council, has given his apologies because he's working on a kind of very serious housing issue that's ongoing at the moment that people may be aware of. But we have been joined by Eddie Stray, who works within the systems thinking service. So firstly, before we move on to members, I don't know, Eddie, if there's anything you want to say in terms of any comment you have on the scoping document or kind of general overview.
I think James Hill and Dave Adams have had input into the scoping document. In terms of the inquiry format, I think we feel a task and finish group might just give us a bit more flexibility in pulling the objectives of the scoping document together. But that was just through discussions that we've had. On an ongoing basis, we can obviously facilitate access for the task and finish group to data, reports, people that they might need to speak to pull this together, so that the task and finish group have a single point of contact, if you like, rather than having to reach out into various areas. And also happy to help put a bit more meat on the bones in terms of the specifics around what we specifically want to look at in terms of services, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eddie. And just before we move on, just pause to welcome Councillor Madden and give him a couple of seconds to collect himself. Welcome, Councillor Madden. For your information, we just started agenda item 5 talking about the systems thinking scoping report that's been circulated. I guess, do you have any interest firstly to declare?
I have no interest, but can I apologise? The time's log jammed at the minute, so I've been an hour travelling.
Yeah.
Okay, so apologies.
No problem. Understood. Thank you very much. Glad you could join us. So moving on, members, we've got the scoping report before us. Are there any comments or perhaps any questions that members wish to ask before we kind of discuss what we want to do in terms of next steps? Yes.
Can I just ask, about 18 years ago, we were doing this in the council. Is this version much different, or is it a continuation?
I think we've evolved along the way in terms of the application of the methodology. I think we've learnt a lot around the support that's required post what we call an intervention, particularly support for leadership, because the sustainability of anything we do with this methodology does rely on ultimately leaders thinking differently about how we manage work.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, members? Okay.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, James did send me a copy of the draft of this scoping document because I'd obviously raised the issue, but I was on holiday and didn't get a chance to read it until I got back, so that's fine. But actually, I think in many ways this really does cover the sorts of things that I was thinking would be useful for that. I mean, it talks about an overview of the current approach, how we actually do it, the methodology, which obviously is useful to know about, the how and why they're commissioned, because when do we actually do this, and whether it could be applied in the future. I mean, I think why it's interesting for me as a member is because it works with the intersection of both how members deal with service issues, because obviously member complaints and member concerns raised, could be part of the review of how things are progressed, changed, and whatever. And that's part of the process by which we might change the way we do things. Plus, also, I think, I mean, I remember, years back when I was chair of housing, one of the issues we used to get a lot of was complaints about housing repairs, and the housing repairs review was very good because it basically took apart the process by which a tenant comes through the door and says, I've got a problem, to us getting a contractor to go and do it, and realising that actually it was more complicated than it needed to be, more opportunities for things to go wrong, for appointments to be missed because contractors weren't available when they should be, and all of that. So actually, the effort of looking at that process was really useful in that it improved the experience for the resident, reduced the number of complaints to members about it, and also increased the efficiency by which the contractors were working, because obviously they weren't missing appointments and so on. So in many ways we can see that depending on what areas are looked at, this can really help us to improve the quality of the service, both for the general public who use it, but also for members' interventions when members deal with complaints about something. So I think it can be really useful for that as well. So, I mean, obviously we've got a question here about what sort of a review it is, and I think we want to discuss that in a moment. I don't preempt that, but otherwise, I think it's captured sort of the sort of thing I was thinking about, and I think for many of us, and I think for me, it will be learning about what's happened, for many years, because I haven't really looked at it for a long time, and potentially for new members, also quite useful to learn how things get done. I think it will be quite useful for that as well. So, yeah, so I think the scoping document does really help, and obviously we can refine it as we go through and maybe decide that certain elements are more important than others as we start to look at it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Heaney. Before we move on to discussion, I guess, around what form any review might take, are there any questions that members want to ask, points of clarification before we move on? Councillor Madden?
Chair, I do apologise again. I don't know whether you've actually started the paper and the first bit, the bullet points, the third and fourth ones, how our interventions currently commissioned and potential future applications, or is that yet to be covered?
I think we can move on to that now. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things we need to kind of really bottom out today is exactly what the scope and the kind of the particular issues we're looking at. So obviously those bullet points are, I think, a suggested summary, but open for discussion or amendment.
Okay, thank you for that. Could I'm with, Mary's absolutely right, and I've said this before, this has been around for a long time. I didn't know it was 18 years, I thought it was more than that. But however, it's been around for a long time, so I presume we're looking at an evolution of the systems, rather than what it was at the beginning. I don't know, it was very crude to start with. I was involved with one of them, but that was way back. In housing, I think it was. Oh, no, I can't remember. But presumably it's been refined, right? But I also want to know, and perhaps we get there at some stage in this, once we've come to a conclusion, I want to know what's happening at the minute anyway. Do people decide to do it themselves? Do departments and sections say, I'd like a systems thinking? Or does somebody from the centre say, you will have a systems thinking? Because in the past it was sort of voluntary, if you like. And there was one when I was cabinet member for Addis Social Care, there was one took part there, but in a little part of the organisation, not the whole lot of it. So I'd just be, if a few words on the interventions and currently commissioned and potential future, not the potential future applications unless it's known in that. And then I'd want to know why and what people, whoever commissioned them, or of these applications, think is good about it. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Madden. I think those questions are obviously definitely things we can explore in more detail as part of a review, but given we do have Eddie here, I wonder if it's useful just for you to kind of briefly give us a summary of what our initial response might be.
I think that it's a fine balancing act. Ideally, this is work that's done by invitation, not least because there's a prerequisite that people are prepared to learn that they need to manage differently. So it tends to come about by curiosity about what's going on in other areas. And that curiosity then leads to engagement of a more deeper understanding. And then the important bit is that leaders know what they're saying yes to when they embark on this process. This is a very difficult thing to do to people. If they haven't got that sort of motivation to be prepared to change. As I say, I think as part of the review, we can get into that a bit more. But yeah, in short, I think that's the important environment you need to create for this to be successful.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I guess before we move on, just to really kind of bottom out the method that we're going to use and the kind of form of any report, I'll probably useful just to take a temperature check of people's views within the room, because I mean this is something that, as I say, the Scrutiny Management Planner hasn't undertaken its own reviews for a little while, so it isn't something we have to do. It's something that's been suggested might be useful, but I guess I really wanted to check members' views within the room whether you think this is something that is a useful thing for us to do and whether this is a good topic or not. Feel free to kind of speak now if people have got any views on whether we should proceed at this point. Mary?
I think we should. I think when I recall, for housing, for example, it was a really common sense thing, actually. It didn't take a lot of work to do. What I don't remember was how good it is at things like areas like culture, for example. Does it work for everything? Or, you know, I just want to know, is it useful for everything, I suppose? So that's what I'd like to learn.
We haven't come up against an area where we didn't think it was applicable. One area might be those low volume sort of large scale projects, so low volume demand that takes an awful long time to do. That might be an area that would require a bit more understanding. But this is applicable to transactional services as well as people-centred services.
Can you just give me some examples?
Yeah, sure. So more recently, we've done some work in sort of public health connected services, sexual health service, substance misuse. Those more transactional services would be things like repairs. Rental income is another area we've done. Adult social care in terms of domiciliary care, occupational therapy, disabled adaptations. So the breadth, we've been able to do any area that's presented an interest in wanting to take this forward. So as I say, the breadth of application is large.
Councillor Gosling?
Cool. Just to kind of follow up on Mary's point, really, I think it's definitely worthwhile us doing it. I know it might be, like you say, a bit out of the norm and we've not done for years, but it does seem crazy to have a scrutiny panel that doesn't scrutinise. So we should definitely do something that covers across council rather than the groups, and from the examples just listed, this seems to tick all of those boxes, so let's do it.
Thank you. Councillor Madden?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I have no problem doing this at all, particularly since it's evolved over the years. But it does say here that the priority is to improve lives. Now, when it first started, the priority was to make savings. Now, that was a clear priority. We haven't got that in here, and I hope we're not doing Americanisations and hiding it, talking about rationalisation and all the rest of it. But if that's actually what it is, to improve the service, and I'm not saying it hasn't been improved in the past. I can't remember any of the details of them. I think that's the first thing we've got to clear. And the invitation only, I don't think, it's not in here, but I hope this is not, and I think you made the point, but imposed upon sections or departments of the organisation. It'll be up to, it'll be a selling tool, if you like, to say, you know, if you want to do something, this is what you could do. And I don't know if I'm invited to join it as a section, whether I've got to pay for it.
Thank you, Councillor Madden. Eddie, I don't know if there's any of the specifics there you want to come back on, or therefore.
I mean, I can cover, so the bit about paying for it, there is a separate budget available for things like backfill. One of the features of intervention is that this isn't a consultant coming in, walking through a system, producing a report. This is somebody from the systems development service facilitating people that work in that system to see things for themselves. And that means taking people out of their day job to do this. And there is money available for that backfill in those areas that show an interest in wanting to do this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vanley.
So why did we stop if it was good? Why are we not doing it? Why have we not been doing it continuously?
We haven't stopped. Yeah, we are still working in various areas.
Okay, great. So it seems there is a consensus to progress, which is good. Yeah, and thank you very much for your comments. I know as chair of the Scrutiny Management Panel, one of the reasons I was keen to kind of take up the role over the course of this year was, yeah, perhaps to look at the way in which the panel was working, ensure we're doing the basics of overseeing the work of the themes panels, but also exploring how we as a panel might be able to develop our work and look at some of these bigger issues that cut across the whole council. So I think this would be a useful first report for us, and hopefully it can then kind of set a bit of a precedent for Scrutiny Management Panel to take a more significant role in further years. So, moving on, I think what we need to do, I think there's two things we need to do. I think we need to bottom out exactly what the purpose of the inquiry is. So at the moment in the scoping document, we have the 4 bullet points, which I think are a kind of useful summary, but I think we just need to get agreement on exactly what we're looking at, and also just ensure that we're clear about the kind of specific issues we're looking at perhaps and what outcomes we want from that. And then once we've had that discussion, we just need to confirm the kind of nature of the inquiry, so whether it's through these Scrutiny Management Panel meetings, as we are here, or whether we take it away to a task and finish group to report back to a future Scrutiny Management Panel meeting. So firstly, in terms of the... Yep, sure.
The one thing that jumped out at me was outcomes, and clearly we've had some over the years, but who decides, once a report is done, and it will, you know, we're used to the recommendations and all that sort of thing. But once the report is done, who then decides which bits are implemented or whatever? You know, is that a council decision, i.e. a member's decision, or is it an office decision?
Yeah, good question. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, looking at the bullet points, I wonder if a way to include that, and feel free to agree or disagree, but is in terms of the 3rd bullet point, whether we add on to the end of that how and why interventions are currently commissioned and then implemented. So rather than just, like say, looking at the start of the process, we're also looking at what the outcomes are. That would be a suggestion. Okay, people happy with that? And in terms of the rest of it then, as it stands, kind of as amended with that little bit, are people happy with that as the purpose of the inquiry? Yep. Okay, great. Moving on then, I think the last thing we need to agree is the inquiry format. So as I said, there's basically 2 options. We can hold a number of Scrutiny Management Panel meetings consisting of all members and have it via that format. Or alternatively, the suggestion has been brought forward that we have a task and finish group, which I think would be selected members, probably anyone who wants to participate, I would suggest, from the full Scrutiny Management Panel, go away, kind of take things offline, so to speak, do the work, and then report back to a future Scrutiny Management Panel meeting with a draft of the report that's come out of that work. So, members, do you have any preference of the two options?
I don't see this as taking very long, Chair, and I think that, you know, as it's been done by Scrutiny Management before, I don't recall it ever, so clearly I wasn't on the Scrutiny Management then. I think it should be the whole panel that does it, chaired by your good self.
Okay, thank you. Any other views on this? Councillor Heaney?
Yeah, I'm fairly relaxed about the format. Obviously, partly depends on members' time commitment. If members are struggling because they have other commitments work-wise, which makes it difficult to come to things, you know, that may limit their opportunity to participate. You know, I'm really relaxed about how we do it really. So because I'm interested, I will want to be involved. So I will try and make time whenever I can to do that and fit in with my other commitments around teaching and so on. So yeah.
Great. Mary?
Can we just see if we've got anybody interested in doing a subgroup? Because if we haven't, then we have to all do it.
Well, I'm happy to take part as chair, and I guess, I mean, I think with task and finish group, it would be, I'm sure there would be a handful of members at least who are interested. Can I just maybe ask either James or Eddie, if you think that there would be particular benefits of a task and finish group versus an alternative approach that we haven't considered, maybe?
I don't think there's anything new, but just as a reminder, the task and finish group, they tend to work outside of these formal meetings and will then report back. So that gives a bit more perhaps flexibility without having to give formal notice of the meetings and how often they're convened. Could potentially do more meetings in a shorter space of time, so to get the actual project done more quickly. Well, if it's done via Scrutiny Management Panel, then you have the transparency of all the meetings being public as well. So there's a couple of different considerations depending on how timely or what sort of target date there is for completion of this that the panel may wish to put forward. But other than that, I don't have anything further to add.
Thank you. Eddie, did you have any comments on that? Or?
All I would say is, like when you talk about consultees and stakeholders, just getting access to those leaders potentially in those other services that have had interventions in their services and getting access to those, it might just constrain it if it's restricted to the Scrutiny Management Panel dates and times for those individuals. That's all I would say.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Constance?
If it was via a task and finish group, does that mean it would be able to be done virtually as well?
Yes, I think so. So yeah. Yeah, it seems to be the main benefit would be flexibility, which I think would probably include virtual meetings. Councillor Heaney?
Just to come back quickly, I mean, thinking about the members, I mean, it could be all of us doing the task and finish work. It doesn't have to be another. So again, it might provide more flexibility for people who've got other commitments. So sort of doing the groundwork behind the scenes and then coming back and formally reporting it, and then maybe, if necessary, asking somebody to come and talk a bit more about one or other areas that we've maybe explored, and to follow up on things we've done already at the formal meeting might be the way to do it. So yeah, I think that could work. Yeah.
So I think we've got an understanding of what the different options are and the kind of pros and cons, if you like. To give my personal view as chair, I think I would probably lean towards task and finish group just in terms of flexibility and the fact that we can, like I say, kind of be a bit more flexible about how we organise meetings and how we engage different parts of the council. Traditionally, or kind of not traditionally, by principle, I guess, I'm much more in favour of being as transparent as possible, which would ordinarily mean having public meetings as much as possible. However, I think because this is an issue concerning primarily internal city council processes, and there's probably more limited public or kind of wider community engagement that would be expected as a report, I think I'll be willing to make an exception to that principle and maybe lean towards the task and finish group. But I guess the decision really is in your hands about how we want to go. Obviously, we've heard kind of both sides of it. To people, Councillor Madden, I know you spoke in favour of having the Scrutiny Management
So
Panel
yeah, well,
meetings.
if we have a task and finish group, which is, you know, I'm with you. I don't give a monkey's, quite frankly. You know, as long as it gets done now that we've decided to do it. But I don't think you can exclude all members. So I think it's got to be open. You might have the group, a name group, but I think if any member wants to come along to it, they're entitled to do so. On that basis, I'd be happy that, because what I wouldn't want to see is a task and finish group that I'm not on, suddenly then becoming the focus of all our questions at its meetings. You know, why did you come to this conclusion? Why did you come to that conclusion? When in fact, you know, the officers will be putting out recommendations. I think that to me is a pitfall for it. But nevertheless, and it doesn't also mean that we get meetings any quicker, I have to say. It'll be something that people need to work out. But as long as it's, if it's named task group, that's fine. But as long as all members will be invited or told what the dates are of the meetings. And you're absolutely right, Lewis, it should be virtual whenever it can be.
Okay, so seems like a consensus is forming around a task and finish group to which all members of Scrutiny Management Panel are invited, and that takes place either virtual or maybe hybrid, if people are happy with that. Obviously, we've now got the technology within the Civic to do that reasonably well, so we can make use of those facilities. And obviously, in terms of transparency and outcomes, the outcome of that report will come back to a public Scrutiny Management Panel meeting and will be published, so that there's that opportunity there for kind of public engagement, if people are interested to do so. Okay, agreed? Great. Right, so I think that is everything we need us to do on that one, James. Are we happy we've got everything out of it we need to? Okay, target completion date. What do people think is a reasonable period of time in order for us to do this? Go for it.
The task and finish group, who are they?
Well, I think the suggestion would be that it would be the whole panel invited to participate.
Oh, well, I missed that. Did I fall asleep? That's what I said to start with. But
Yeah.
did
I'm not sure.
Oh, for God's sake, right.
I agreed with you anyway. So yeah, in terms of future panel meetings, whether it might be useful to orientate around that, so we've got a date in a diary for us to come and report back. I've got a feeling January we have one in for, is that correct? February? Gotcha.
Yeah, so you'll have a SMP scheduled, which would primarily be the budget meeting. So that would be the main item on the agenda, but you could put it on as well. But of course, you can set a meeting up and set a target for whenever you wish, really. I just find it helps. If you do have a target date to complete by, then you've got something to work to, as if it's something that sort of is a bit more organic. It can take a bit longer.
Is it just the budget meeting we have in the diary at the moment?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, because I think we also previously discussed having a meeting or an agenda on a meeting to look at the outcome of themes reviews, recommendations, didn't we? Were we going to do that with the budget meeting, or was that going to be a separate meeting?
I think the panel's up to date at the moment. There were some reports that went through in July Cabinet, I'm going to say. So we can set something up, but I'd suggest we do that perhaps separate to the budget meeting, because the budget meeting is quite lengthy and it's good to dedicate all of the attention of the panel on that very important topic.
Yep, agreed. Okay, so my suggestion would be we set up a separate meeting from the budget meeting, perhaps for January, to give us up until Christmas to undertake the review, get it all drafted and agreed, and then in January to have a meeting where we have two agenda items. One is the systems thinking report that Task and Finish Group will have done, but then also, I guess almost a 6 monthly or so, review then of recommendations that have been passed by Cabinet in this July, so that we're kind of keeping on top of what's been previously agreed in terms of the feed panel's work. So if people are happy with that, we will circulate dates outside of the meeting, get some agreement for a date in January, and then in between then, anyone who can participate in the Task and Finish group, we will meet to discuss the work of the Systems Thinking Review. Okay? Perfect. Right, I think that is everything we need to discuss then, members. Thank you very much for your time. That concludes the meeting, and I'll declare the meeting closed at 6:15. Hang on the bells.